Welcome back, everybody. If you remember from last time I gave one of these videos, we looked into what casting was and how we really need to take time to dive into the potential casting options that are far more complex than we might know. So, with all that in mind, I want to go into looking at some of the biggest fan casting things that I've seen out there on the internet. I'm going to start with the biggest ones I think that are out there, which is Marvel's First Family, and we're going to ultimately see what aspects of those characters would help determine the type of actor we're looking for to portray the role. But before I get started, I just want to make sure that everyone is getting the full experience of the Ploomination, so be sure to share, like, and subscribe. And check out my Patreon for even more content. Links below. The Fantastic Four is my favorite comic book series. They're my favorite ones to read. Ever since I started reading it, I found the characters compelling, the stories sensational, and the moral lessons complex and relevant, especially as it's gone on. And when you look back at the long history of movies based on Marvel projects, it really is a shame that we've yet to see a Fantastic Four portrayal that does those books justice. And so today, I will be taking on these aspects. Who are the Fantastic Four? What kind of story should we use to introduce them? And how ultimately should they change throughout the movie? Now, a few big disclaimers before I start. First, I will definitely be showing clips from previous portrayals of these characters. This is simply to showcase something in the video beyond just me talking to a black screen. It is in no way an attempt to endorse or showcase portrayals in any of those aspects. I like some of them, I don't like others. I'm just going to leave it at that. Second, these are simply based on my own opinions from reading and are in no way definitive to characters nor to the story that will ultimately be told. I, like everyone else, am simply a fan who likes to imagine just as much as anyone else does. And finally, if you disagree with anything I've said, I completely get it, but I just ask, let's be civil and understand that we all have different opinions. All that being said, let's analyze the Fantastic Four and one of their potential stories through some complex casting. So for this, I'm going to go in order of what I think feels the most straightforward to the most complex. And while again, you may disagree with some of my analysis, I just hope you enjoy my process. So up first is who I feel is the simplest of the four to create. Johnny Storm is a hothead. I know that sounds like a simplistic way to start this kind of a breakdown, but it's true. He's the youngest member of the team, and with that comes this aspect of impulsivity. Johnny tends to be the first member of the team to burst into the fray, and as a result, he's often put in harm's way far earlier than the other members. Likewise, he also tends to be the one to signal the others for action, especially in early issues. But being a hothead is just too simplistic, and Johnny is a far more complex character than that. A lot of the people that I've seen cast in these roles tend to be guys who are good-looking, young, attractive people who just know how to put on this show. Yes, he's a hothead because he's very self-confident, and you know what? He kind of rightly deserves that. He's young, he's good-looking, he's talented, and ultimately he's actually really smart. Often in the books, Johnny's the one Reed turns to when it comes to mechanical engineering. And this is because Johnny is a brilliant mechanic. His main hobby outside of working for the Four is fixing and building cars, and he often uses his flame powers to weld, melt, and heat all kinds of experiments. The previous portrayals of the character have never really had that chance to dive into this aspect of Johnny. We got the cocksure kid, but we never really got to look at the guy who knows why he's so cocky. And it's not just because he's hot, no pun intended. It's because he hasn't had major failures up to this point. The biggest setbacks for him have always allowed him to just bounce back, and even when there are major problems, he's managed to get himself out of them or at least contribute to the final solution. So, let's look at the Johnny we want to meet in a new universe. I think Johnny needs to be someone coming off a big win. He's likely to be the most front-facing member of the team, and he knows how to work a crowd as well as win over eventual naysayers. And yet, I think there's a part of him that knows he's not being fully utilized. He's a character who has more to contribute than just being the PR person and wants to actively take a role that lets him show off his brains just as much as his flashy personality, fire powers, and all. And this journey doesn't need to be huge either. I think Johnny is a character who needs to grow, and he needs to really step up and find a way to showcase himself. I think it's an aspect of him overcoming the other team members' perceptions of him and really just stepping up to the plate when the time comes. He needs to fix problems and showcase clear and decisive thinking rather than just diving in and throwing balls of fire without a second thought. In essence, if he wants the team to take him seriously, he needs to find a way to take himself seriously first. All in all, Johnny is someone who comes across flashy and impulsive, has a streak of arrogance and immaturity, but ultimately shows the potential for not just cleverness, but ultimately the ability to really problem solve and come through for his teammates on a truly intelligent and unexpected level. But do so without losing that charm and energy that makes Johnny who he is. So to sum up, if you're casting for Johnny, you need someone who's smart, little too self-assured, definitely charming, frustrated that he's in a box, impulsive, and very energetic. And it wouldn't hurt if he's pretty good looking too. Ben Grimm is the ultimate version of a character with a hard outer shell and a soft interior. Before even looking at this character in terms of traits, know that there are really two ways this character could be brought to life visually. These are the methods Marvel's used that I am calling Groot versus Thanos. Groot was put on screen through motion capture with a stand-in actor, and then Vin Diesel portrayed the character vocally. Thanos, by contrast, was entirely Josh Brolin the whole time. I think for the thing to work, you want the actual actor on set to have those emotional connections with his castmates, and ultimately isn't having limited dialogue the way that Groot did. Additionally, Ben Grimm will likely probably be shown in some sort of pre-transformation form, so you want those portrayals to be consistent, if adapted a little bit. What this means, though, is that the actor who portrays the Thing will have to do so on a digital level and really push the character's personality past that rocky exterior. I also don't think that we're in an era of visual storytelling where the prosthetic practical stuff holds up anymore. So ultimately, the look of the actor is far less important than the feeling and personality of the character, especially if we never actually see that character in the past and only see the blue-eyed, ever-loving Thing. Ben is a tortured and conflicted character. He's constantly bouncing between the man he was and the thing he is. In some issues, he's this ball of rage, just angry at the world for cursing him with this horrendous form. In others, he's fully embracing his ability and actually values his strength and how it lets him contribute to the group. And strength is his biggest contribution. Ben is likely the least intelligent of the four. That's not to say he's dumb and he has his areas of expertise, but when it comes to the other three, he rarely is the one to put forward a thoughtful solution. He's more willing to just let others point him in that direction and just go. It's something I think we need more of, especially in the MCU. Every character seems to have some genius or intelligence that defines their character, and I really think we need more people like the way that Chris Hemsworth has recently been playing Thor, who are just big muscle-bound guys who use their muscles to get through their problems and suboptimal solutions and solve issues in a really straightforward way. And what makes this Thing work is because he's not only strong, but he also is closed off. He's not someone who opens up to people easily, even people he's close to, and his place on the team is really as that solid foundation where everyone else can turn to help. But with being the Rock, again, no pun intended, comes the heavy responsibility of burying your own feelings deep beneath the surface until the pressure finally breaks down in that person and they cast it off. And that's absolutely how Ben works. He knows he can bear the weight both physically and emotionally until he can't. What makes Ben so great in the team dynamic is just how deep he gets those emotional moments and then lets them out in really bad times. He can be explosive and he has this huge temper. That being said, he has to remember that he's angry. He's not mean. He's not someone who's like malicious. I know it seems confusing, but you have to know that anytime Ben comes at one of his teammates in rage, it's usually like a wounded animal rather than an asshole. Thing's a big ball of emotions and he lets them out very easily while putting on this facade of this tough guy. And that duality needs to be shown. Ben needs to be able to push through with this tough exterior, but also let his deep and complicated emotional side come through, both within his outbursts and through his quiet moments. And Ben is also very practical. While Reed, Sue, and Johnny are often thinking through complicated scientific solutions to problems, Ben looks at things on a much more surface level and sometimes sees solutions that the others miss, or makes wisecracks that result in Reed having a breakthrough. I think this aspect of Ben is central to the character as it mirrors how he sees himself on the team. Ben feels like he's the one member of the group who doesn't fit in with the other three. He's hands-on, he's practical, he's down to earth, and often he sees things on very simple terms. On paper, he doesn't make sense with the team, and that is why he has to be there. Because without him, there would be three like-minded people who only saw one avenue to every solution. Ben adds that extra step that keeps them from going down that path every time. And then there's the aspect of Ben behind this tortured exterior. Ben is a lover, not a fighter. He cares so much about not only the other members of the Fantastic Four, but so many other people. His relationship with Alicia Masters begins very early and ultimately lasts longer than most other relationships in the Marvel universe, even rivaling Reed and Sue's. And their relationship occurs because the blind Alicia feels the gentle and sensitive side of Ben beneath that tough, rocky exterior. He is a compassionate, deeply emotional soul, and it has to fuel his outward sense of toughness as a shield to protect him and those around him from being hurt. In his case, again, he also is constantly making wisecracks and jokes as a second way to deflect that emotional aspect of himself and divert attention away from his shortcomings. All in all, Ben is a big ol' softy who shields his vulnerabilities in the same way he shields his teammates. He has big emotions and can have strong emotional outbursts, but always as a way to put up shields, never to intentionally hurt those around him. He's very straightforward and grounded, and he can think in really practical understandings of the world, and as a result he can sometimes see very simple solutions that his teammates can't. And from a relational standpoint, Ben is the very foundation of the Fantastic Four. He has the potential to support the teammates or cause them to crumble if he gets too emotionally charged. In essence, the heart of the Fantastic Four is Ben Grimm. So to sum up, Ben in a casting situation like this would need to be someone who is outwardly tough, inwardly sensitive, guarded but emotional, practical, full of wisecracks, steadfast and devoted, and ultimately filled and fueled by love for those around him. If Ben is the foundation of the Fantastic Four, then Sue is the glue. Sue's the one member of the Fantastic Four that all three of the other members are closest to. Johnny and her as siblings have a strong connection, and her ability to be down-to-earth and more subdued in personality contrasts with his flashier and more forward-facing one. But also she knows how to have those hard conversations with Johnny in a way that no one else can, and does so in a way that actually causes him to listen, rather than deflecting or playing up the aspects of himself that cause others to become charmed by him and let their concerns go. Sue can see through him, and so she knows how to get in there and really tell him what he needs to hear. Likewise, she's often the only one who listens to Ben and actually hears his frustrations. She doesn't brush him off or chalk up his absurd reactions to just Ben being Ben. She builds that relationship in a way that Ben can actually make these big, bold confessions of emotion and know that they're going to be heard. Sue listens to Ben when no one else will, and that draws them closer together as not only friends, but confidants. Sue is the one person Ben can lower his shields for and know he won't get hurt worse than before. And of course, Sue has power with Reed in a way that no one else does, and no, I don't mean just through their romantic relationship. Sue is the one who pulls Reed out of his spirals of intellect. I'll get to Reed in a moment, but he can often go down this rabbit hole where he has to solve a problem and he won't let it go. Sue knows how to get to Reed and pull him out of that place so that he can breathe and just be human for a moment. Sue knows how to connect with Reed so that he can see that there is more to life than scientific breakthroughs and altruistic humanism. The issue with Sue, especially early on in the comics, is that she's often more defined by her relationships with the other members on the team than she is by herself. But Sue has to be her own person, and Sue is arguably untapped potential. If you look at their actual power sets, she's easily the most powerful member of the team, even if she doesn't think it. She can vanish in crowds, and at the same time she can literally break people and withstand wild amounts of potential damage through these invisible shields. Her personality works very similarly. Sue is selfless, and she puts others in the team before herself all the time. And in doing so, sometimes she can appear less present or forward-facing, but ultimately she comes through to save the team when they most need it. All of this has to come together and also not rob Sue of her own agency. Because at the end of the day, Sue has to be a strong woman and capable of existing without the other teammates. Even if she doesn't know it, she's part of this team because she chooses to be. In a way, she doesn't really need them nearly as much as they need her, but she chooses them because she is selfless, absolutely selfless. She cares about these three men, and it helps her become the best version of herself, the version that nurtures, encourages, listens, and protects. All in all, Sue has to be strong in her convictions. She has to be someone who could stand on her own in any circumstance. She has to be smart enough to challenge Reed, calm enough to defuse Ben, and grounded enough to hold Johnny down. She has to be someone who doesn't want the spotlight and can vanish when she needs to, but she also has to be convicted enough to know when to step out and put that wall between her closest allies and the things that would threaten them the most, even themselves. She is the one person without whom this whole team would crumble, and yet she is humble and selfless in everything and is willing to let her teammates take the glory. So to sum up, the Sue that we would want to complement this team needs to be someone who's humble, encouraging, loyal, selfless, compassionate, firm, steadfast, and ultimately she has to be someone who can connect with the other three members of the Fantastic Four in different ways. Reed Richards is essentially a brain. I mean, he's the smartest man alive. He's constantly being reminded of this fact by everyone all the time, including himself. And because of this, he actually is crippled by his own intelligence because he is calculating faster and more complexly than certain supercomputers can. He's a being of, at times, absolute logic, depending on his intelligence to save not only himself, but everyone he loves. And this is a burden that he feels he alone has to bear. The Reeds we've seen in the past have always been far too casual, never equaling the high-stakes level of worry for those around him. If a problem arises, Reed sees it as his duty to solve it, he accepts that his intelligence needs to be the thing that saves everyone, and over time, that can cause him to become obsessive in his work, neglecting those around him to pursue his scientific goals. And it can even cause him to forget parts of his own life like sleep, hygiene, and even food. And Reed's obsessiveness is not limited to just his basic work either. This obsessive nature increases when he fails. While the scientist in him looks for explanations and solutions to every problem, that part of him that cannot find those solutions that he knows he should be capable of figuring out gets more and more agitated. And ultimately this throws him into deeper turmoil at the possibility of continuing to fail and the guilt of letting down his teammates and those he loves, who are people that he sees as his responsibility to take care of. But this is to say that Reed is not pure logic. He's not without emotions either. He has his outbursts, he loses his patience, he can make fatally human mistakes constantly, and he blames himself for everything. Reed cannot accept anything less than perfection from himself, and it shows. He is never satisfied, always finding excuses to work, grow, improve, and discover. It is his relentless scientific desires that often drive the team forward, and ultimately what keeps Reed going when all hope is lost. But this aspect of Reed can be seen as aggressively ambitious. He not only is the smartest person alive, he knows it, and that leads to an unceasing quest for discovery and invention because the only person who can outdo him is him. Reed wants to know more and more, and he wants to prove not only to himself but those around him that he is the person who can fix everything all of the time. This adds increased pressure to him when the problems are a result of his own work. He often, more than anyone else, puts pressure on himself to fix Ben because he blames himself for what happened to Ben, and that internal guilt drives so much of Reed's journey. In essence, Reed is constantly being stretched to his limit, no pun intended. He's pushing himself to do everything all at once, all of the time, and it's starting to tear him apart. He can't accept anything less than his best, and that often causes him to falter, find him paralyzed, or break down in a way that requires the other members of the Fantastic Four to step in and fill in the gaps in Reed's mind. All that being said, Reed is still brilliant. He can perform mind-blowing calculations in a moment's notice and is the ideal leader from the team. He's got this nerdy charm that comes from his obsessions, and he knows how to talk to people about complex ideas in a way that can simplify them, sometimes with prompting. And yes, when he is at his worst, he can forget things like decorum or politeness. He ultimately knows that the other three look up to him, and he has to make those hard decisions when they can't. All in all, Reed is a leader. He's pushing himself constantly to be a better person and is driving both himself and the rest of the Fantastic Four forward as a result. But he also has some unchecked scientific ambitions and a deep-seated guilt over his biggest failures. Reed is complex and wants the best for everyone around him while sacrificing his own health and happiness to achieve that same happiness for everyone else. So to sum up, in this situation, Reed would need to be clever, brilliant even, logical, calculating, tense, ambitious, driven, conflicted, guilty, willing to take the lead but not relishing in the role, and ultimately a fragile human being with complicated feelings and occasionally obsessive desires. So then we put the pieces together. How do the Fantastic Four work as a team? Firstly, one of the biggest things about the Fantastic Four is that they are not superheroes by choice. It's one of their biggest themes in the comics. They are scientists who strive to make discoveries to better humanity. They take up the mantle of superheroes because often their work causes danger that can affect Earth, and they know it is their responsibility to use their gifts to defend and advance humanity. And this can cause them to come into contact with wildly heightened cosmic powerhouses who could instantly annihilate Earth if they chose. And often the Four use their powers separately before finding a way to come together and deliver that definitive triumph over their foes. Or if they can't do it with might or force, they use ingenuity, persuasion, or some other means to overcome the opposition. A lot of times it's Reed who is the one doing the thinking, but he's not always the one to execute the plan. Sometimes Sue has to talk someone down, sometimes Johnny has to divert something, sometimes Ben just has to hold something up. They find the solution that works for all of them. Now, I like to think about the story that I would want to tell to help establish these characters firmly in the world of the MCU without shoving the larger MCU aside or taking a big long detour for us to see how the Fantastic Four came about. Several others have said for this team to skip their origin story for it, and I agree. Nothing about their origin is interesting, memorable, or truly key to their dynamic relationship or overall goals. Yes, you can have some aspects mentioned in the story or shown in flashbacks, but really the whole idea is that they aren't superheroes and are likely performing a scientific inquiry or a journey that is far more interesting. And given the expansion of the cosmos and the multiverse that's happening in the MCU, it would make sense that this story could take place in space. I actually think sending them into space or into another universe would really provide an easy explanation for why they haven't been there in the present day. And it would set up what I think is an ideal intro story for these characters that is in this universe/multiverse. The other thing is that they are the ones with the main antagonist of Doctor Doom, who is arguably Marvel's most complex villain. And I think for this to be successful, Doctor Doom needs to just kind of be avoided, at least at first. I think he's more of a Thanos level villain, long-standing, someone who can come and play a lot in the background before finally just taking his moment. And while he has a big presence, I don't think he's the ideal candidate for an introductory movie. I think the big thing is to introduce a threat who comes from the cosmos, showcases enough power to effectively spar with all four of them, while still being expendable enough to be done away with at the end of the movie if necessary. You know, a big, interesting character who we're not afraid to lose. And I've racked my brain and I've gone through every villain that I can think of, and honestly, for me, it's not even a question. It's the Super Skrull. Now, I know that the Skrulls have been altered for the movie universe, especially in Captain Marvel, but there's no reason that the Super Skrull couldn't start as some wild radical who wants revenge on humanity, or has turned traitor to work with the Kree to gain power, or to take command of the Skrulls over from Talos. All of this could allow the Fantastic Four to intervene and give a fun introduction while still letting the universe expand by introducing dissension amongst the Skrull refugees and hinting at larger threats in the cosmos. And I'm gonna say this, I have no idea who should play Super Skrull. Surprise me, Marvel. So let me just break down my final thoughts. Johnny Storm is fiery, immature, and young, learning to grow into his role within the team and being taken seriously by his teammates. Ben is a hard shell, defending a really vulnerable and scarred man, deeply emotional, and it causes him to act irrationally at times, but at the end of the day, he loves those around him. Sue is compassionate and selfless, willing to put herself last to help those around her, and yet when the time comes, she will do anything to protect her family. And Reed is a genius, a touch arrogant, ambitious, and obsessive, but never without desire to do good and help humanity, even if it means letting parts of himself get stretched to their limits. Those are my thoughts on the team and their potential story. But at the end of the day, none of this is up to me, and maybe this will all be a wildly different interpretation. Reed being so smart that he only thinks he's ambitious, Johnny trying to juggle responsibilities, Stu constantly hiding her emotions, while Ben tries to keep everybody together. And maybe that complete change works incredibly well, and maybe it doesn't. I know that there's a lot of potential options that could come from this, and I have no desire to let my hopes, ambitions, and expectations become the thing that ruins this movie for me. All in all, I just hope that whatever movie comes out of this has solid casting choices to effectively tell the stories needed to be told. I also hope that the movie does justice to Marvel's first family, and ultimately tells a compelling and interesting story for all to see, myself included. I want to be as enchanted by the Fantastic Four on screen as I am when I read the comics, and I'm willing to sacrifice my own ideas to let that enchantment happen. So ultimately, this whole process is really just a step too far and too complex for me to handle. Talk about complex casting. Thank you everyone for watching this video. I would love to hear what you think of my breakdown of these characters. Were there other pieces that I may have missed of their personalities? What parts of these comics would you like to see come to life on screen? Let me know in the comments down below. And help me grow this channel by liking and sharing this video around. Check out the Patreon to get early access to some of these videos and to even see behind the scenes of my other work, Tough Act to Follow. And to ensure you never miss a single video, whether they be Tough Act to Follows, One to Watches, Welcome to the Party Pals, or Complex Casting, be sure to subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and as I always say, thanks for taking the time to get Ploominated.